First, though, I'm going to talk to you about some of the stuff that we would have been talking about otherwise. And I have listen, you are now entitled to either laugh at me or tease me or suggest that I need to get my tinfoil hat renewed, because I found the timing of that announcement last night that the £2.6 million media briefing room, or whatever you want to call it, was being essentially mothballed. Boris Johnson hired a former journalist called Allegra Stratton to host televised daily briefings, which would see her answering whatever questions journalists wanted to ask. And also, of course, the idea was that the Prime Minister, as he already has, would turn up there on a relatively regular basis to deal with media inquiries, like the one that Paul Waugh of the Huffington Post dispatched rather beautifully yesterday. So you are perfectly entitled to call me a conspiracy theorist, and I haven't checked the timeline. But it's highly unlikely that the decision to mothball this £2.6 million, your money, by the way, this £2.6 million media centre, and dispense with the services of a press secretary hired to do White House-style daily briefings, it's highly unlikely that it was taken yesterday evening. Am I right? Am I right? So it was clearly taken previously to yesterday evening, which leaves one question. When will we announce it, chaps? When would be a really good time to announce this really embarrassing thing that we've decided to do? When would be a really good time to announce that we've spent £2.6 million on something that we've already decided that we don't want to do? Now, conspiracy number one is that when Paul Waugh of the Huffington Post asked the question you are about to hear, Boris Johnson decided that perhaps exposing himself to regular scrutiny from journalists with the guts to speak truth to power was not the best idea he'd ever had.
And if I may, on Greensill lobbying, it's sparked a lot of interest in whether the Nolan principles of public life have any teeth or relevance anymore. Do you agree with the Independent Office for Police Conduct, which in its review of your links with Jennifer Arcuri concluded, and I quote, "It would have been wise for Mr. Johnson to have declared this as a conflict of interest, and a failure to do so could have constituted a breach of the Nolan principles." Now, those principles include acting with honesty and integrity. Do you believe you acted with honesty and integrity in your relationship with Miss Arcuri, who claims you conducted your affair in your marital home?
Yeah. Do you want to hear his answer? And then you tell me whether or not you think it's a coincidence that an hour or two later they announced that they were shutting down the £2.6 million, or not shutting it down, but at least sticking it all on ice.
My answer to your second question is yes. OK, everybody, thank you very much.
Complete integrity there. Breaking one of the 10 commandments, committing adultery, riding roughshod over the ministerial. I tell you what, if you were a self-professed Christian, if you were a prominent Catholic in the upper echelons of the Conservative Party, you'd be handing your resignation in now, wouldn't you? Claiming that breaking one of the 10 commandments is somehow acting with integrity. But hey-ho, that's for Jacob and his conscience. So that's conspiracy theory number one. Conspiracy theory number two, which for the record I think is much more likely to be true, that would have been a contributory factor to the decision to spaff £2.6 million of your money up the wall. It wouldn't have been taken at that point, but I presume it had already been taken. Conspiracy theory number two is all about the timing, and I don't have a full timeline on me. I don't even know if it's possible to get one. So my first thought was, at what point did we begin to hear that the jury had arrived at a verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial? And at what point was it first announced that they were sticking this media centre in the proverbial fridge? I don't know. It's pretty close. But then I actually got to work this morning and saw the front pages of the newspaper, and I think that the sidelining of the press secretary and the axing of the daily White House briefings, roughly around page 10 or so, it would have been much further up the paper in normal times. What time was it announced that Chelsea were pulling out of the European Super League? What time did the whispers begin that the whole shebang was falling apart? And what time was it announced that the £2.6 million briefing room was to be sidelined. I use whatever word you want. The journalist hired to be the press spokesman is taking on a role as the CEO, the COP26 climate conference. I don't know, liaison officer, PR person, spokesperson. I do not know. That, of course, is a job that presumably ends when the COP26 climate summit ends in Glasgow in November. So what's the timing on that? Does anyone know? What came first? Because you remember then that civil servant was rightly ridiculed for being busted suggesting that this would be a good day to bury bad news when I think it may have been a September 11th terror attack. It was certainly an event of epic and horrible proportions. I mean, that's a example of burying bad news. I don't know if I will ever be able to prove it, but I would not be surprised if the timing here was far from coincidental.